What if I told you that humanity might be living in the dark ages right now? That we could be centuries behind where we should be technologically and scientifically? The year is 391 AD. Christian mobs storm through Alexandria, torching what may have been the greatest collection of human knowledge ever assembled. In mere hours, centuries of accumulated wisdom, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering goes up in flames. But what if those flames never ignited? What if the Library of Alexandria survived? What if, instead of losing an estimated 400,000 scrolls containing the collected knowledge of the ancient world, this treasure trove continued to grow and flourish? I'm about to take you on a journey through an alternate timeline that will completely change how you see human progress. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why many historians consider the destruction of Alexandria to be one of humanity's greatest tragedies. And you might just be shocked by what our world could look like today. But first, let me paint a picture of what we actually lost on that fateful day in 391 AD. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a library. It was the world's first university, research institute, and intellectual hub all rolled into one. Founded around 295 BC by Ptolemy I, it represented humanity's first serious attempt to collect and preserve all human knowledge in one place. Imagine walking through its halls in 200 AD, at the height of its glory. You'd pass scholars from across the known world, Greek mathematicians working alongside Egyptian astronomers, Roman engineers collaborating with Persian physicians. The air would buzz with intellectual energy as some of history's greatest minds pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Here's what made Alexandria truly special. It wasn't just about storing knowledge, it was about creating it. The library employed a systematic approach to research that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. Scholars were given salaries, research budgets, and access to the world's greatest collection of texts. They were encouraged to question, experiment, and build upon the work of their predecessors. And the results were staggering. At Alexandria, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, off by just 2% from modern measurements. Aristarchus proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun, 17 centuries before Copernicus. Hero of Alexandria invented the world's first steam engine, a device that could have kick-started the Industrial Revolution 1,500 years early. But here's the thing that will blow your mind. These weren't isolated discoveries. The scholars at Alexandria were building a comprehensive understanding of the natural world. They had detailed maps of the human circulatory system, mathematical formulas for calculating planetary orbits, and mechanical devices that modern engineers still find impressive. Now, the traditional story tells us that all of this was lost when Christian zealots burned the library in 391 AD, followed by the Arab conquest in 641 AD. But what if that never happened? What if instead of destruction, Alexandria continued to thrive as the intellectual capital of the world? Let's explore this alternate timeline, starting with the immediate consequences. In our alternate history, the year is 400 AD, and the Library of Alexandria continues to flourish under Roman protection. The Emperor Theodosius, rather than supporting the destruction of pagan institutions, recognizes their value and establishes them as centers of learning that transcend religious boundaries. With this protection, something remarkable happens. The library's collection grows exponentially. Instead of losing 400,000 scrolls, the collection expands to over 1 million texts by 500 AD. Scholars from across Europe, Asia, and Africa continue to flock to Alexandria, drawn by its unparalleled resources and intellectual freedom. But here's where things get really interesting. Without the destruction of classical knowledge, there's no Dark Ages in Europe. The intellectual traditions of Greece and Rome don't disappear, they evolve and expand. By 600 AD, Alexandrian scholars have made breakthrough discoveries that change everything. Building on Hero's steam engine experiments, they developed practical steam-powered devices for agriculture and manufacturing. The mathematical traditions of Euclid and Archimedes, preserved and expanded upon, lead to advances in engineering that allow for the construction of massive aqueducts, roads, and buildings that surpass even Rome's greatest achievements. Most importantly, the scientific method, which in our timeline wouldn't be fully developed until the 17th century, emerges in Alexandria by 650 AD. The library's scholars, with access to centuries of accumulated observations and experiments, begin to formalize the process of hypothesis, experimentation, and peer review. Now, let me share something that will really shock you about what happens next. By 800 AD, just 400 years after the library's survival, Alexandrian inventors have developed primitive printing presses, centuries before Gutenberg. The combination of preserved classical texts and new printing technology creates an explosion of literacy across the Mediterranean world. But that's not all. The medical knowledge preserved at Alexandria, combined with continued research, leads to revolutionary breakthroughs. By 850 AD, Alexandrian physicians have developed early forms of anesthesia, understand germ theory, and have established the world's first medical schools with standardized curricula. The ripple effects are staggering. European cities begin establishing their own libraries and research institutions, modeled after Alexandria. The Islamic Golden Age, which historically peaked around 900 AD, becomes even more spectacular as Muslim scholars have access to an unbroken chain of classical knowledge to build upon. Trade networks expand as improved navigation techniques, developed through Alexandrian astronomy and mathematics, allow for safer and more efficient sea travel. The economy booms as new technologies increase agricultural productivity and manufacturing capabilities. But we're just getting started. The real transformation comes in the second millennium. As we enter the year 1000 AD in our alternate timeline, the world looks radically different. The preserved and expanded knowledge of Alexandria has created a civilization that's technologically and scientifically centuries ahead of our historical timeline. Universities modeled after Alexandria now exist across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. The printing press has made books affordable and widespread, creating a literate population that would have been unimaginable in the real Middle Ages. But here's where our alternate history takes a truly dramatic turn. Remember, in our timeline, the scientific revolution didn't begin until the 16th century. But in Alexandria preserved world, it starts in 1100 AD. With access to complete classical texts on astronomy, mathematics, and natural philosophy, medieval scholars don't have to rediscover basic principles. They can build directly on advanced ancient knowledge. Ptolemy's astronomical observations, preserved and refined by generations of Alexandrian astronomers, provide the foundation for heliocentric theory to emerge 4 centuries early. By 1200 AD, scholars at the University of Paris, working with translations of Alexandrian texts, have developed telescopes and are making detailed observations of planetary motion. The geocentric model collapses not through religious persecution, but through overwhelming observational evidence. The technological implications are mind-blowing. Steam power, refined over centuries rather than decades, powers mills, pumps, and transportation by 1300 AD. The Industrial Revolution doesn't begin in 18th century Britain. It starts in 13th century Mediterranean. Cities grow larger and more sophisticated as improved engineering allows for better sanitation, water systems, and construction. Agricultural innovations increase food production, supporting larger populations and freeing more people for intellectual and artistic pursuits. But perhaps most importantly, the scientific method, refined over centuries at Alexandria and its daughter institutions, creates a culture of inquiry and experimentation that permeates society. The witch trials and persecution of natural philosophers that plagued our historical timeline simply don't happen when scientific thinking is deeply embedded in the culture. Now, here's something that will completely change how you think about human progress. By 1400 AD, our alternate timeline has produced technologies that our real world didn't achieve until the 19th century. Mechanical calculators based on ancient Greek gear technology help astronomers and mathematicians make complex calculations. Steam-powered ships revolutionize trade and exploration. Medical knowledge advances exponentially. With germ theory established centuries early, cities implement public health measures that prevent the devastating plagues that swept through historical Europe. The Black Death either never occurs or is quickly contained through quarantine measures based on scientific understanding of disease transmission. The age of exploration begins earlier and proceeds more safely. Improved navigation instruments and ship design, developed through centuries of preserved and expanded classical knowledge, allow for more successful voyages. The Americas are discovered and colonized with less loss of life and more scientific approach to understanding new lands and peoples. But here's the really incredible part, and this is where our alternate timeline becomes truly mind-bending. As we approach 1500 AD, the accumulated effects of preserved Alexandrian knowledge have created a completely different world. The Renaissance doesn't happen as a rebirth of classical learning, because that learning never died. Instead, it's a culmination of continuous intellectual development spanning over a millennium. Leonardo da Vinci, working with engineering texts that were never lost, creates flying machines that actually work. Michelangelo designs buildings using mathematical principles refined over centuries. The artistic and architectural achievements of this alternate Renaissance surpass anything in our timeline because the artists have access to unbroken traditions of classical knowledge. Scientific understanding reaches levels that our world wouldn't achieve until the Enlightenment. Universities across Europe are conducting systematic experiments in physics, chemistry, and biology. The printing press spreads new discoveries rapidly, creating an accelerated pace of innovation. But the most shocking development is yet to come. By 1600 AD, the cumulative effect of all this preserved and expanded knowledge produces something remarkable: the early stirrings of electrical experimentation. You see, the ancient Greeks knew about static electricity and magnetism. In our timeline, this knowledge was mostly lost and had to be rediscovered. But in Alexandria-preserved world, scholars have been building on electrical observations for over 1,000 years. By 1600, they've developed primitive batteries and understand basic electrical principles. This means that the Age of Enlightenment begins 2 centuries early, powered not just by new philosophical ideas, but by technological capabilities that seem almost magical compared to our historical timeline. Now, let me reveal what I think is the most incredible implication of all this. By 1700 AD, our alternate world has achieved something that will shock you: the beginning of powered flight. Not the careful, experimental flights of the Wright brothers, but systematic aviation based on centuries of preserved and refined understanding of physics and engineering. The steam age reaches full maturity centuries ahead of schedule. Railroads connect major cities across continents. Factories powered by advanced steam technology produce goods at scales that support massive populations. But here's what really transforms everything: the scientific revolution that took our real world 3 centuries to complete happens in just 1 century in Alexandria-preserved world. By 1750, scholars understand electricity, magnetism, and thermodynamics at levels our world didn't reach until the late 1800s. The implications for medicine are staggering. With germ theory established for centuries and advanced understanding of human anatomy preserved from classical sources, physicians perform surgeries that won't be possible in our timeline until the 20th century. Vaccines are developed earlier, and infectious diseases that devastated historical populations are largely controlled. Communication advances rapidly. The printing press evolves into more sophisticated forms. Telegraph systems, based on electrical understanding developed centuries early, connect distant cities by 1800. But the most incredible transformation is intellectual. In our world, it took until the Enlightenment for scientific thinking to truly challenge religious dogma. In Alexandria preserved world, scientific methodology has been refining and strengthening for over 1,000 years. The result is a society where rational inquiry is deeply embedded in the culture. This creates a positive feedback loop. Better education produces more innovative thinkers who make new discoveries, which improve education further. The pace of progress accelerates exponentially. Now, here's where our alternate timeline reaches its most mind-blowing conclusion. As we enter the 19th century in our Alexandria preserved world, we're looking at a civilization that's reached technological and scientific levels our real world wouldn't achieve until the mid-20th century. Electricity powers cities. Advanced chemistry has produced materials and medicine centuries ahead of schedule. Transportation systems using steam and early experiments with electricity connect continents. But most remarkably, the accumulated intellectual capital of centuries of preserved classical knowledge has produced something our timeline couldn't achieve until the computer age: systematic information processing and storage. The library traditions of Alexandria, never broken, have evolved into sophisticated systems for cataloging, cross-referencing, and analyzing vast amounts of information. Medieval scholars, working with complete classical texts, develop logical and mathematical frameworks that anticipate modern computing principles. By 1850, mechanical calculation devices based on ancient Greek gear technology and refined over centuries are performing computations that won't be possible in our world until electronic computers. The space age begins in the 1800s. Advanced mathematics and physics, built on preserved classical foundations and refined over a millennium, provide the theoretical framework for rocket technology centuries early. Astronomy, with an unbroken tradition of observation and calculation, understands celestial mechanics well enough to plan space travel. But here's the most incredible part: the social and philosophical implications. In our real world, scientific advancement often came at the cost of social upheaval. Religious wars, persecution of scientists, and resistance to new ideas slowed progress for centuries. But in Alexandria preserved world, scientific thinking has been integrated into society for over 1,000 years. The result is a more stable, rational, and prosperous civilization. Wars still happen, but they're shorter and less devastating because advanced technology makes them more decisive. Disease is largely conquered. Education is universal because printing technology made books affordable centuries earlier. Most importantly, the continuous intellectual tradition has produced a society that values knowledge, inquiry, and rational thinking as fundamental virtues. So what would our world look like today if the Library of Alexandria had never burned? We'd be living in a technological paradise that surpasses even our current 21st century achievements. Space travel would be routine. Disease would be largely eradicated. Energy would be clean and abundant through technologies developed centuries ahead of schedule. Cities would be marvels of engineering, built with mathematical and architectural knowledge refined over millennia. Communication would be instantaneous across the globe through systems developed gradually over centuries rather than rapidly over decades. But perhaps most importantly, we'd be living in a more rational world. The scientific method, embedded in human culture for over 1,000 years, would have created a society where evidence-based thinking is natural and automatic. Climate change might never have occurred because advanced understanding of atmospheric science would have led to clean energy technologies centuries earlier. Nuclear weapons might never have been developed because the gradual pace of scientific advancement would have allowed for better international cooperation and control. The social sciences would be as advanced as the physical sciences. With centuries of systematic study of human behavior and society, we might have solved problems of poverty, inequality, and conflict that still plague our world. In essence, we'd be living in the future that science fiction writers imagine, not because of rapid technological acceleration, but because of continuous, steady progress over nearly 2 millennia. The loss of the Library of Alexandria represents one of history's greatest tragedies precisely because it broke the chain of human intellectual development. The Dark Ages weren't inevitable. They were the direct result of losing the accumulated wisdom of centuries. But here's what I find most inspiring about this alternate timeline. It shows us what humans are capable of when knowledge is preserved, shared, and built upon rather than destroyed. It demonstrates that intellectual progress isn't just about individual genius. It's about maintaining and expanding the collective wisdom of our species. The story of what might have been if Alexandria had survived is ultimately a story about the power of education, the value of preserving knowledge, and the incredible potential that emerges when human curiosity is allowed to flourish across generations. And that's a lesson that's just as relevant today as it was 1,600 years ago. Every time we choose to preserve knowledge rather than destroy it, every time we choose education over ignorance, every time we choose to build on the wisdom of the past rather than starting from scratch, we're following the path that could have led us to that incredible alternate future. The question isn't just what would have happened if Alexandria had survived. The question is, what amazing future are we building or destroying with the choices we make about knowledge and education today? Because in the end, we're all inheritors of Alexandria's dream, the dream of collecting, preserving, and expanding human knowledge for the benefit of all humanity. And that dream is still very much alive.